video we're going to take a look at my PDF grading rulers. I've printed them off. They also come with a very detailed guide to using the rulers, so please take a close look at that. I'm going to show you the practical steps involved. I've printed off both of the rulers. This is just a print on obviously 100% scale to an A4 or US letter size paper, and this is the metric version. It's the millimetre version, so it's broken down into 10 millimetres per centimetre, so it's 1 millimetre grids. They're very small but necessary for grading. That's printed off on just a regular piece of paper, but what I tend to do is print them off on a piece of tracing paper so that I can see through them. So I just use good quality tracing paper, and I tend to print off a couple of copies at a time when I print them off, so I've got them to hand. There's also the inch version, and they are separated into 1/16 of an inch squares. That's a bit easier to use because they're not as small as the millimetres, so this isn't as accurate. However, it's easier to use. The millimetres are smaller, obviously a little bit harder, and again just the see-through traced version of the ruler as well. I'm going to show you how to trace the skirt, and I think I will use the inch version of the ruler today. So I have my basic skirt block here, and I've also taken a copy of, or just extracted the page from the booklet that shows the grades or the increments for the skirt. I'm going to work on the 5 centimetre or 2 inch grade, and this is what's called the split diagram, and it shows me where the skirt needs to grow and in which areas. If you're new to grading, I suggest as well that you just make a copy or just cut this out of your workbook. It's the Cartesian graph, and that will help in that it's a very quick visual reference to the positive x direction, the minus x direction, the positive y and the minus y, and the central point there is our 0, 0 point. When you look at the ruler, you'll see that you have some crosshairs here in orange, and right in the centre of there is a circle, and that is referred to as our 0, 0 point on our ruler. So we will place that strategically on the table. To place our blocks or our pattern on the table, I'm going to have a nice straight line. You should be using a 3H pencil. However, I am going to use a pen because you won't be able to see the very fine lines of the pencil, but you must use a nice sharp 3H pencil. So I'm going to place a straight line there on my paper to begin with. I'll pop my X and Y coordinates there in case I need them, and I've got my grade plan in front of me as well. I've gone ahead and marked what we call the split lines on the block, so that's where the areas that the pattern needs to grow or reduce. So it will grow if we're increasing the size, reduce if we're grading down a size or downgrading. So we have the horizontal line here where the pattern, and we'll talk about increasing the size in this video. However, if you want to decrease the size, you just do the exact opposite. So to increase the size, we would need to open the pattern here by 3 millimetres or 1/8 of an inch. And I've popped some arrows there just to make it nice and clear. And also we would need to increase the pattern here by 3/8 of an inch or 9.5 millimeters. So they're the two areas where we would grow the pattern in either girth or circumference. I also have 3 lines here, so 3 vertical split lines, and that's where the pattern will grow for length. So that's where the pattern will move in the X direction. So either positive X or a minus X direction, depending on how we're adapting. And here I have 1/8 of an inch, which is 3 millimeters, another 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters. That's 1/8 of an inch, however, that will be 4 millimeters because it's just the rounding of the quantities. So I need to place my pattern directly on my X axis here, and I'm going to mark a point here, and this is my 0 point. So I just need to mark a point there, and I'm going to place the crosshair there directly on that point and line up the orange line on the ruler with my line on the paper. So make sure that's nice and straight. And then I want to secure my ruler, so when it's perfectly placed, I'm going to pop it there. And I'm going to secure the ruler here at the top. I'll just move that along so that you can see. And here at the corner. So my ruler's secured, however, I can still pick it up and move it. And I'm going to go ahead now and place my pattern on the X line there, and I'm going to mark around my pattern in my base size, which is a size 12. I've chosen a size 12 because the size 12 is central. It's the centre of the size range I want. I want to grade up to a 14 and a 16 and then down to a 10 and an 8. So I've chosen a size that's in the centre of the size line that I require. I've gone ahead and traced around this block, and hopefully you can see that in a pale blue pen. And that's my base size, which is a size 12. I have my ruler here and I can flip that backwards and forwards. So I'm going to grade up now from a size 12 to a size 14, and I'm going to use a pink pen. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. I don't want to use a really thick pen because it kind of defeats the object really of grading. So we're going to first of all mark from this first vertical split line here, so mark from there up the centre front and to the first horizontal split line. And what I'll do is just make a little notch there. I wouldn't normally do that, but that's just to indicate that that's where I've marked to there. And think of this as our first section. We're going to work on this section first. So I'm going to bring my ruler in now and just place it underneath there. So I'm going to grade for length first. I'm going to move in the X direction. It's going to be a minus X direction because I'm moving in this direction. So I can see for my first split line, I've marked to here. I'm going to move the block 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters to lengthen it. So for me, that is 2 squares on this ruler. And I just need to make sure that's perfectly lined up before I start. So I'm going to move 2 squares, 1/8 of an inch. If it was the millimeter version, the centimetre version, I would be moving 3 mil. And make sure that everything's lined up, that you're still lined up with the x-axis and everything's perfectly straight. Okay, and that now allows me to mark the next portion of my block, which is this portion here. And it also allows me to mark the notch. So I'm just going to mark that notch there. And that means I've graded the notch. I'm going to move on to my next split line here, and it's another 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil. So I just need to go back to here and move again. 1, 2 more squares down, so that's an 1/8 of an inch. Check my alignment. Check everything's straight. And now I can mark this next portion to the next split line. And then I'm on this split line here. That's an 1/8 of an inch, or it would be 4 mil. So I'm going to move again. 1, 2. Make sure everything is perfectly aligned. And now I can mark the final section of the centre front and the hem just to the first horizontal split line. Let's move on to the next section, and this next section here, this is the one we're going to concentrate on. This contains the dart, and I've also placed a drill hole there with my drill hole maker so that I can mark the exact point of the dart there. So I'm going to this time have a look at how I need to grow the pattern in the Y direction, and we're going to be moving in a positive Y direction. So I can see here that the pattern needs to increase by 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil. So I'm going to work on that one first. So I need to move the pattern back to the 0 point there to start the width grade, or the circumference grade, or the girth grade. So I'm going to move my pattern 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil. So just 1, 2, and make sure it's perfectly lined up with the ruler. Everything is straight there. And I'm happy with that. So if I'm happy with that, I can just weigh that down. I'm just going to move my ruler out of the way, and that means now that I can mark from this split line here, mark in the dart, and I'm marking all the way along to the next split line there. I also need to mark the dart apex there. Now there's nothing else to mark within here. There are no pattern features, no drill holes, and nothing else to mark in this section. And I'm quite happy with the length grade because I know I'm going to continue on from a straight hem. However, if you have a pattern that's slightly curved or has an unusual detail in the hem, you just want to be sure that you have graded everything perfectly, you can do the length grade again, so you can move the pattern. So just for the sake of repeating those steps, let's do that again. So this time keeping it perfectly straight on the width grade. I know I've come up by 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to move down 2, so 1, 2, 1/8 of an inch for this length. There's nothing to mark here because it's all internal. This one, another 1/8 of an inch. 1, 2, and then the final one, another 1/8 of an inch, so 1, 2. Just make sure I'm perfectly straight there. And that should all line up and I can mark in the hem. But as I said, that would be not strictly necessary because you can just mark that in straight. So let's return our pattern back up to the orange line, our y-axis at the waist level. So now we need to work on this section here. So we need to open this by 3/8 of an inch or 9.5 mil to open this section up. So for me that's 6 boxes on the ruler. So I'm just going to move that across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Making sure that's all lined up there. And now I can continue, and this will blend in. So this waist will need blending. It may have dropped slightly. Just make sure that's perfectly straight. Yep. And continue marking this last section here. And we can mark to this first vertical split line. So mark in over the hip here. Now we have a notch here on our hip, so we're going to mark in that notch next. So now we're on the length grade, we're going to add in 3 mil or 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to move down 1/8 of an inch. And that will allow me to mark in this next section here. So from here and I want to mark in my notch so that I can mark in my hip level. So now we have another vertical split line here, so we're going to be moving in the -x, and that's another 1/8 of an inch. So 1, 2. Again, check everything's nice and straight, and we can mark in this section here. And our last one is another 1/8 of an inch. So let's just move down. And everything should line up at the hem, which it does. We need to make sure we're nice and straight. And you can mark in the rest of the hem now because we're there at the hem. On the final corner there of your pattern. So if I just move that from there, you can see the notches here. I failed to mark in the notch originally on the hip line on that side, so I just need to pop that in there. So hopefully you can see here the blue outline is the size 12 and the pink outline is the size 14. I'm just going to go over those with something a little bit darker so that you can see those really clearly. There's the notch. And we have some blending to do there. And then there's the dart apex for the size 12. And then back to the waist, the 0 point there. And then we have the centre front. So just to very quickly mark round the size 14 for you. Make that perfectly clear. Just some nice blending there through. And again, the waist will follow the shape, and there's the apex for the 14 and the dart. So there you have the two sizes, and of course if you want to increase by another size, then just repeat the steps again, but you double the increments from the base size. Or if you want to reduce a size, then you're just doing exactly the opposite to the movements that we made to increase the size.